The fact is that the Trump folks are busted. And Catherine Levitt yesterday, what was funny is at one point she says, we've got three handwriting experts have already said that this is fake. And it's like, you completely just made that up.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got Professor Scott Lucas from the Clinton Institute at the University of College Dublin on the show. We're going to speak all about this Epstein stuff and, of course, some geopolitics that happened overnight. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report again.
Hey, thank you so much, Maddie.
You haven't been on with me for a while, and it's good timing because quite a lot has happened in the last 24 to 48 hours. So to kick off, we'll move into global politics in a bit, but I do want to start on a US domestic level of this Epstein drama. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, she briefed reporters with the official US response from the government about this letter and this photo that was published by US lawmakers. Of course, it was in response to the Wall Street Journal report from months ago, but they've finally made it public despite Trump and his team saying that it does not exist. This birthday message for Epstein's 50th birthday book in 2003. Now, the response from Leavitt on behalf of Trump was that the president did not write this letter. He did not sign this letter. She expressed that she was willing to have a handwriting expert look at the letter. She said, "This is a hoax. Is the Democrats pretending to care about victims of crime, concoct a hoax to smear the president?" Now, Scott, you and I both know that this is not just Democrats that were calling for the release of this letter or for the release of any files related to Jeffrey Epstein. But I guess, what is your reaction to the response from the White House?
You hear that sound? That's the sound of desperation. I mean, swear to God, Catherine, what? Oh, no, wait, this letter. Remember, first of all, when Donald Trump responded to the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, it was, no, this doesn't exist at all. I never wrote a birthday card. I never issued a drawing. Look, I never did a drawing in my life. Now, remember that people then came out and said, oh, here's a drawing, and here's one I've got on my wall. But Trump doubles down and goes, I'm going to sue the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion. $10 billion. Now, what happens is that the House committee, which said, look, we want these files, or at least to start these files, they at least get the birthday book. And there is, exactly as the Wall Street Journal described it, because guess what? The Wall Street Journal had a copy of it. They've got not only that lewd, crude drawing of the woman that Trump made, but they've got that lewd, crude, homage to Jeffrey Epstein, talking about, oh, isn't it great? We got young women hanging around as well. Now, he didn't say girls. So we can't say there's any criminal activity here. But, the fact is that the Trump folks are busted. And Catherine Leavitt yesterday, what was funny is at one point she says, we've got three handwriting experts have already said that this is fake. And it's like, you completely just made that up. That does not exist. She said it was in the Daily Signal, which is a right-wing, scribble from the Heritage Foundation. They had nothing of the kind. Then you had right-wing activists, far right-wing activists like Charlie Kirk going, it's clearly a hoax. So let's walk this through. First of all, the signature on the document, not my signature, Donald says, I signed my full name, Donald Trump, as president. Well, no. Donald Trump as a businessman used to only sign documents as Donald, and guess what happened minutes after he said that? People came out with letters that they had from Donald going back to the 1990s and the early 2000s and said, here's mine right here. And look, it looks like those signatures match up completely.
And Scott, just to interrupt you, there's that letter to Rudy Giuliani that's going viral. And apparently in a lot of these personal letters where they weren't really business related, he did sign just Donald.
Yeah, he did. That's what he did. And everybody knows it. And then, so they were at the point then where they were saying, well, somehow this had to be, quote, a hoax document. And so work that through. That either means that someone 30 years ago, anticipating Donald Trump would become president, right, would create an entire document to Jeffrey Epstein and smuggle it into the birthday book. Or that someone in 2025, realizing that there was a scandal, somehow got a hold of Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book and snuck it in there. Yeah, we're used to Trump lying. What's the difference here? So let's get to the significance. Trump's lying to his own supporters. we come back to the fact, which is that some of his supporters are invested in this. They don't want this to be brushed aside. They don't want this to be covered up. They think there is something to see here. They thought it was going to be about the Democrats. They thought it was going to be about the Clintons. They want to know. Now, what is it actually about? There are some Republican legislators, and it's still a minority, but there's some Republican legislators that want to see this. They want clarity. The question on both counts is how many? How many Republican legislators are going to push this and how far? And then in terms of the wider scenario, how many people will actually break away from Trump over this when they have not broken away with him over so much in the past?
And the thing is that you mentioned this Wall Street Journal because you said that it was clear that the Wall Street Journal had a copy, and it was exactly how they had described it. They said that there had been a lewd drawing, and it was a bizarre thing that he wrote. He wrote that him and Jeffrey have certain things in common. He said, "Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." Now, Trump said that this is a dead issue, Scott, but Trump's been in office for the past 8 to 9 months, and this has single-handedly been probably the biggest plague on his presidency in the sense that it's the scandal that will not die. So it is a dead issue in the sense that it will not die for Donald Trump. It keeps being resurrected. And the fact that US lawmakers were able to publicize this and contradict, if it's true, contradict exactly what him and his administration have said. So regardless if they get this letter forensically tested in front of the public, Scott, how will Trump be able to ignore this?
They ain't going to have that letter forensically tested, because if they have that letter forensically tested, they know what it's going to say. And they're going to know it's going to say it's real. So that the question here is, the Epstein issue had receded in the past few weeks, Maddie, just because of all the craziness that's going on. And of course, in terms of impact, there's some far more serious in terms of direct effect on people's lives craziness in the States, like the military on the streets, for example. Trump absolutely ripping apart agencies. The whole fiasco of what they're doing to healthcare, which we saw with Robert Kennedy Jr. this week. And then, of course, there's, and we'll talk about some of it in a minute, there's all the stuff happening geopolitically where Trump will just step in and say, look at me over here, look at me over there. So Epstein has sort of receded just a bit. What happens here is, of course, is they can't make it go away for good, right? Because there's a jolt here. And there are maybe more documents that are out there that get leaked, or there's more information that may get leaked. The fundamental here is, I think it does come back to whether Republican legislators will let it go away. I mean, if they don't press the issue in the House, they don't press for full revelation, Trump may get away with it.
Scott, you the only saving grace from this Epstein scandal is that the White House may use Russia and Ukraine as a distraction. So they might bring Russia and Ukraine back into the focus, try and slap these tariffs on Russia, trying and make it a focal piece of the news so everyone knows that the US is taking it seriously, that they will be punishing Putin. But we'll get into that in a second. But that has been the strategy of basically pulling the wool over Republican and MAGA's eyes by throwing a different situation into the mixer. And it had worked up until this point when US lawmakers had publicized this photo. But say if the White House does go ahead, they get this letter forensically tested. But for right now, Scott, Trump has said that he is still very confident in his $10 billion lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal. But surely this weakens his case.
That case is never going to court. I mean, and again, I know I'm making a lot of projections here, but the fact of the matter is you're going to actually go ahead with a $10 billion lawsuit. You can imagine all the costs that are going to be involved. And Donald don't like spending his own money too much. When you have almost no hope of winning that case, I mean, that was a distraction at the time, and it was an attempt, a very ill-advised attempt to intimidate Rupert Murdoch. And at the end of the day, this is really interesting. In this case, Rupert's far more powerful than the world's supposedly most powerful man. He's got the actual facts on his side on this case, and he's got the stronger position on his case. Because again, I'll come back to this. Does Trump really want to tick off Murdoch, given that he may be vulnerable on other issues? Does he really want to lose Murdoch's support? because we'll bring it back to the fact that so far Fox has covered Trump. Fox TV has continued to cover Trump on all the craziness that he's done. If he pushes Murdoch too hard, Murdoch might say, I'm going to look elsewhere. I'm going to look to another Republican.
And Scott, this is an issue that has been bipartisan, in the sense that both sides of the political aisle are interested in it and both sides of the media are interested in it. And Murdoch owns media with viewers and audiences from both sides of the political aisle. So you're right, he's very powerful in this sense. But say if the testing comes back on this letter and it matches Trump's handwriting from that era, from that 2003 era of his life, it does call into question those who've been advising Donald Trump and his inner circle about this strategy of deny, deny, deny. Because the reality is, no, it doesn't incriminate him. This letter doesn't incriminate him in the sense that it makes him someone that was involved in whatever Jeffrey Epstein was doing. We don't know if it makes it look as if he knew what was going on. But what it does, Scott, as you've pointed out, it makes him look like a liar and it makes him look like a gaslighter as well. So what I'm trying to ask is, should the strategy have been from the get-go from Donald Trump? Look, I was friends with him. That's quite well documented. We had a fallout in 2005 over whatever it may be, real estate developments, or he said poaching staff from Mar-a-Lago, including Virginia Giuffre. But should he have just come out and been honest? Yes, I wrote him a birthday letter. Yes, I had a friendship with him. No, I didn't know anything about it, but that's the reality. I couldn't foresee the future, that kind of thing.
Donald don't do that. I mean, whether or not that should have been, Donald don't do that. So let me just put it in this context as to why he don't do that. Look, and again, disclosure, I'm actually just finishing up a book on the first Trump term, and indeed on what led to Trump getting into office. Walk this back, Maddie. Trump's tactics when he was a businessman, when he was politician and then became president, is always to go on the offensive and to never accept what happens. And he gets away with it. He gets away with it with two reasons. One is because a lot of people support him even though they know he's a liar. I think a lot of them ought to know that he lies, but they buy into it. They're happy to buy into it. And then I think a lot of other folks in the end get bullied. So let's talk about it with a standpoint in terms of women, first of all. He's busted in 2005 tape, the Access Hollywood tape, about grabbing women in inappropriate places. You fill in the blanks, right? That comes out in October 2016. But he gets away with it. He gets away with it because of a series of events I can tell you about where everybody starts shouting Hillary's emails, right? And indeed WikiLeaks, on behalf of the Russians, drops the emails in October 2016. He is accused by, I think, up to 20 women now of sexual assaults. And he's by and large gotten away with it, with the exception of, this also happened this week with E. Jean Carroll. Now remember, this was, in the words of the judge, a sexual assault tantamount to rape in the 1990s in a dressing room in New York City. Trump is on the hook for defamation, which is now $83 million. And that verdict was upheld this week. He's got to pay that $83 million. So, just in terms of his personal life, he's gotten away with most of it with that one exception. In terms of his businesses, he's gotten away with it up to the point where he was convicted of fraud, found guilty of fraud in a civil case in New York State. But he doesn't even have to pay that fine yet, right? Because that was held up a few weeks ago. In terms of politics, he got away with the cooperation with the Russians. And the Trump campaign did cooperate with the Russians. It's there in black and white in multiple documents. Mueller reports and an intelligence committee, multiple volume report. But he got away with it. He never even got impeached over that. He gets away with blackmailing Ukraine, holding up their military aid as they're being threatened by Russia, survives impeachment, and he gets away with the Capitol attack. He is not convicted over the Capitol attack. And he becomes president again after all of that. So if you had that record, would you not try to do the same thing again? Would you not try to get away with it just by lie upon lie and think in the end, enough people will back me and those who oppose me will fold. They'll give way.
And that's an interesting take on why he wouldn't change his strategy that clearly has been working, Scott, and has for years. But let's move on to what's happening in the international space. Now, Israel has conducted a military strike into Doha, Qatar, targeting Hamas leaders overnight. They were meeting to discuss a proposed ceasefire in what looked to be the Hamas headquarters. Now, while the top leaders that Israel were actually targeting, they failed to do so on that level, but they did kill 5 people, mostly aides and the son of a senior Hamas leader. Now, Scott, this was the first time Israel has carried out a military strike into Qatari soil. So the big takeaway here is that Netanyahu didn't tell Trump again. Trump said it was too late for him to stop it once she was privy to the information and the plan. So your reaction to this, that Netanyahu yet again has failed to tell Donald Trump about his plans?
Yeah, one additional piece of information which may prove be important in coming days, Maddie. There are actually 6 people that were killed. The 6th person is a member of the Qatari internal security forces. So he didn't just they didn't just hit Hamas people. A couple of the people that died, the son of one of the Hamas negotiators, Hale, one of his staff, and then 3 probably bodyguards, security personnel. Now, in terms of the significance, we're not sure. I'm not sure yet, Maddie, how much the Trump administration and Trump himself knew in advance about the attack. And let me explain this, why it's not clear. When the Israelis first putting out statements yesterday, some Israeli officials were telling the Israeli media, we coordinated this attack with the Americans. They actually said we didn't just inform, we coordinated. Now that was revised to say, no, the Israeli military informed probably American military colleagues that we were going in, and we did it in advance. Now, we don't know the timing of when the American military, if this is true, then put the message through to the political side up to the White House. What, again, is significant beyond the question I will answer in a minute is that when, according to the Trump people, when Steve Witkoff, the real estate developer who is supposedly also an envoy, notified the Qataris, it was 10 minutes after the attack had begun, according to Qatar, which is why they are not pleased this morning, to say the least. Not only were they attacked, they had no heads up. Now, the reason why I'm not sure is the Trump administration is caught between a rock and a hard place here. If they stick with the line that Trump was not informed by Netanyahu, and certainly Netanyahu's saying this, Netanyahu's saying we acted independently. We didn't need the go-ahead to do this. The Americans look weak. They look weak in the face of Israel going ahead and doing this because Israel has, and I need to give it, they have attacked an American ally, a longtime American ally. They have attacked the home of one of the largest U.S. military bases in the world. They have attacked one of the world's largest oil producers. They have completely ripped up the notions regarding sovereignty and security of that country, who is also, of course, part of a bloc that includes Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So do the Americans look weak to the Gulf states and saying, oh, well, or even worse, do they say, well, no, we knew about this, we knew about it, and we at least accepted it, which makes it look like they have chosen Israel over their relationship with the Gulf states. If Israel had attacked Hamas in Gaza, because Israel has been attacking Hamas in Gaza since October 2023, Gulf states are absolutely fine with that. If Israel assassinates a Hamas political leader, as they did with Ismail Haniyeh in Iran last year, Gulf states are okay with that. You don't do it on our territory. And that's why the White House came out with this absolute botched statement yesterday, which was, we don't like the location of the attack. We're not happy with that, but we're pleased that Hamas is being eliminated. Well, look, guys, you can't have it both ways, because that's where the Hamas negotiators were. So you decide what you're doing here, because the broader significance of this, Maddie, because this story is going to run and run, is everybody should stop talking about negotiations for a ceasefire. Just stop. I mean, I know the Qataris are talking this morning that they're still mediators because they still want to look like they haven't been completely, basically set back by the Israelis. But the fact of the matter here is that Hamas had accepted or was close to accepting last month proposals for a phased release of all the hostages, for Israel to retain some military troops in a buffer zone in Gaza. Those were proposals similar to, guess what? Those presented by the envoy and real estate developer Steve Witkoff months ago. And you know who wouldn't listen to those ceasefire proposals? Benjamin Netanyahu. And do you know how I know that? Because the Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid said it. Netanyahu chose. He could either accept the ceasefire. That's it. We could stop it, get part of what he wanted in Gaza, or he could go all out for the long-term Israeli occupation of Gaza. But to do that, they have to, in his words, absolutely destroy Hamas. And so he has put both the Americans and the Gulf states into corners. What do they do next?
It's an interesting situation, and I do want to read out a few things that have happened, because it's important to acknowledge that this allyship was meant to be quite strong between the US and Qatar right now, because we saw Donald Trump travel to the Middle East this year to really strengthen these relationships with the Gulf states, as you said, Scott. He was obviously there for his personal business, as you and I have spoken at great lengths. But we did see Trump not only accept a plane from Qatar, we saw him broker a $96 million Boeing order, a $1.2 trillion economic package, and a further real estate development to be in Qatar under the Trump name. So that puts him in an incredibly awkward position if he didn't know or if he did know. But all we know is that regardless, Donald Trump and Netanyahu's relationship is probably a little bit strained right now. But I want to move on because we don't have too much time. So,
Maddie, just 30 seconds. I don't think it's strained. And I'm just going to flag it for our next conversation. I don't want to think that. You go all the way back to when the Israelis effectively told Donald he ain't getting his Nobel Peace Prize back in March, when they walked away from phase 2 of the ceasefire, when they not only resumed military operations, they cut off humanitarian aid and ratcheted up the crisis. At every step, at the end of the day, Trump has come in and backed them. He backed them with, for example, with Riviera in the Middle East, which is displacement of all the Gazans. He backed them when, after they're starving Gazans, he sends in the real estate developer and purported envoy Steve Witkoff, as well as the U.S. ambassador, to make this sham PR tour of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. You know, the Israeli operations that put in a little bit of aid and get a lot of Palestinians killed. And he backed Netanyahu in advance on this one when he said 3 days ago on Truth Social, this is Hamas's last chance. I don't think Trump breaks with Netanyahu, whatever happens.
Oh, I definitely don't think he'd break, but I do wonder what was going on behind closed doors, Scott, and whether he's giving him a stern warning to at least give them the heads up so that they can tell Qatar. But let's move on to Poland, because they've had to scramble fighter jets overnight and shoot down Russian drones that had crossed into airspace from Ukraine. Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that there were multiple violations of Polish airspace. But Scott, discussions to end this war will ramp up again this week when several EU leaders will meet with Donald Trump individually, either Monday or Tuesday earlier this week. We haven't had many updates, or they might be later in the week. But it just goes to show that Trump and EU leaders really need to stop beating around the bush with this war if Russia is willing to enter into Polish airspace and I guess reiterate his goals, Scott, which Putin's goals have always been to occupy more land than just Ukraine. We've always thought that perhaps Poland was next. So your reaction to this, Scott, if drones are so easy to get into Polish airspace, what's next?
I think this may be a small signal that not Trump, but members of the Trump administration, some of them, as well as Europe and Ukraine, are stopping beating around the bush regarding the fact that this Russian invasion doesn't stop, okay? Vlad's not going to cease fire. He's not going to stop the attacks from the air. Last weekend, in fact, it was a record Russian drone and missile attack on Ukrainian territory. The immediate significance is it wasn't just Polish operations that took down these drones. Now, Russia has been flying drones over Polish airspace before. You know, they haven't decided to respond. When Poland responded this time, they weren't alone. They had support from Italy, the Netherlands, and the United States. And I've got that on rock solid information.
And Scott, just to interrupt you, because I want you to keep going, but I do want our audience to know that, yes, Russia does fly drones into NATO airspace quite a lot to test NATO's response.
Yeah, and this time there was a line which was shown to the Russians, and the interesting is the timing of this, right? Which is okay, this stops, right? Because it just puts put a niggle in the head of some of the Russian planners. How far will they go here? But it also intersects with wider discussions that are taking place. The security guarantee discussions, are developing. They've been developing, to be honest with you, for months. But especially since Zelensky and the European leaders were in Washington on August 18th, 3 days after Trump's love fest with Vlad. Those are serious discussions amongst the adults in the room, amongst the military planners, and then you get some political involvement in it as well. But those security guarantees are largely for when the Russian invasion is halted, because you can't put European troops in with U.S. cover until basically the area stops being so hot. So what do you do in the meantime? Well, in the meantime, you send out these signals, which is, okay, we're going to start doing more for Ukraine's air defenses against what you're doing. So this idea of running drones across territory, that's not going to happen. But the most significant thing that's happening this week, Maddie, immediately is sanctions talks. It's not Trump's talks with the European leaders that matter here. What the key thing here is that the talks that are going on at working level that took place. You might remember that Trump spent all summer saying, because he was upset, no Nobel Peace Prize for me, about Vlad killing Ukrainian civilians. And so it was the 50-day deadline. Then I'm going to toughen the sanctions. It was the 10-day deadline. And then there was no deadline because he met Putin in Alaska and he stopped talking about it. U.S. administration officials last week, and I know we got to wrap up quickly, so we're going to do it within 1 minute, is the U.S. officials started talking last week about the fact that they might come back to toughen sanctions. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, on Sunday, the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, on Monday, but they said the Europeans have got to move. Now, the Europeans are already moving. They're considering a 19th package of sanctions. The irony is the biggest barrier to that is Donald Trump's other friend, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. But they are proceeding with this, and they have made the commitment to cut off Russian energy supplies by 2027, the end of 27. Now, the talks that are being held are between the EU's top sanctions envoy, David O'Sullivan, longtime Irish diplomat, really, really good, with American officials, which are going to be the details of sanctions on Russia and its trading partners. I'm not saying these will be confirmed, but those talks are developing. And again, we can come back to it for a later conversation. Russia's weak point right now might be how does it still have the economic capacity to keep the invasion going on all fronts, aerial attacks and ground attacks?
Most analysts would say no. And I had Professor Richard Ports on the show earlier in the week on Monday, he said, looking at the numbers, he's an economist, looking at the numbers, it would say they've got quite literally 12 months at best if we keep up these sanctions, if Ukraine keeps targeting Russian oil refineries. Scott Lucas, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Well, thank you. We didn't quite solve the world, but we gave it a hell of a good go. So there you go.